What if I told you that showing a single Jackson Pollock painting to Leonardo da Vinci could fundamentally alter the entire trajectory of human artistic expression for the next 500 years? You might think introducing the Renaissance master to modern art would simply inspire him to create even greater masterpieces. But the reality is far more complex and potentially catastrophic than you could imagine. Picture this: you've just materialized in Florence, 1503. Leonardo is putting the finishing touches on the Mona Lisa when you approach with a portfolio containing reproductions of Picasso's Guernica, Pollock's No. 1, Duchamp's Fountain, and Warhol's Campbell's Soup Cans. You're about to witness one of history's greatest minds grappling with artistic concepts that won't be invented for another 4 centuries. But here's where it gets interesting. Leonardo's reaction wouldn't just change his own work. It would trigger a cascade of consequences that could reshape the Renaissance itself, accelerate or completely derail the scientific revolution, and fundamentally alter how humanity understands creativity, beauty, and the very nature of art. Let's start with what happens in those first crucial moments. Leonardo examines your modern art collection with the same analytical intensity he brought to dissecting cadavers and designing flying machines. His immediate reaction would likely be a mixture of fascination and confusion. Remember, this is a man who spent years perfecting sfumato, the subtle gradation of colors and tones. Suddenly, he's confronted with Pollock's chaotic drip paintings that seem to reject every principle of composition he holds sacred. But here's what you didn't consider. Leonardo wouldn't just look at these works as finished pieces. His mind would immediately start reverse engineering the techniques. He'd want to understand how Pollock achieved those intricate paint layers, what materials Duchamp used for his ready-mades, how Warhol created those perfectly reproduced images. Within days, Leonardo would be experimenting with entirely new approaches to art making, potentially developing screen printing techniques 3 centuries early and exploring abstract expressionism while Michelangelo is still carving David. The immediate consequences ripple outward from Leonardo's workshop like shock waves. His assistants and students witness their master creating works that break every established rule. Word spreads through Florence's artistic community about Leonardo's radical new approaches. Other Renaissance masters, from Raphael to Michelangelo, are forced to respond. Some might dismiss Leonardo's new direction as madness, while others attempt to understand and adapt these revolutionary concepts. But the real problem isn't what you'd expect. The issue isn't that Renaissance art becomes too advanced too quickly. It's that the fundamental philosophical foundations underlying Renaissance humanism begin to crumble. Renaissance art was built on the belief that humans could achieve divine perfection through mathematical precision, anatomical accuracy, and spiritual devotion. Your modern art collection introduces concepts that challenge these core beliefs. Abstract expressionism suggests that emotion and spontaneity might be more important than technical skill. Conceptual art like Duchamp's Fountain argues that the artist's intention, not craftsmanship, defines art. Pop art implies that commercial imagery can be as worthy of artistic attention as religious subjects. Leonardo, with his insatiable curiosity, becomes obsessed with understanding the cultural context that produced these works. He begins asking questions that won't be philosophically explored for centuries. What does it mean for art to be abstract? If a urinal can be art, what isn't art? How can commercial imagery achieve the same status as religious painting? These questions, coming from one of the Renaissance's most influential figures, begin to undermine the period's artistic certainties. This is where things get truly terrifying. The Renaissance wasn't just an artistic movement. It was a complete restructuring of how Europeans understood knowledge, science, and humanity's place in the universe. Renaissance art provided the visual language for humanist philosophy, scientific observation, and religious reform. By introducing modernist concepts prematurely, you've potentially disrupted the careful balance between observation, faith, and human potential that made the scientific revolution possible. Consider the cascade effects. If Leonardo becomes obsessed with abstract artistic expression, does he still conduct his anatomical studies with the same precision? His detailed drawings of human anatomy were crucial for advancing medical knowledge. If he's spending time exploring non-representational art, those scientific contributions might never happen. More critically, if Renaissance art stops emphasizing accurate representation of the natural world, does the emphasis on empirical observation that led to the scientific revolution ever develop? The most disturbing possibility is that you've created a temporal paradox that undermines the very cultural foundations that eventually produced the modern art you showed Leonardo. Modern art movements like abstract expressionism and pop art were reactions against centuries of representational tradition. They gained their power and meaning by breaking established rules. But if those rules never get properly established because Renaissance art gets derailed into premature modernism, then the context that made modern art revolutionary disappears. What happened next will blow your mind. Within a generation, European art splits into competing factions. Traditional patrons, particularly the Catholic Church, reject the new abstract approaches as heretical or incomprehensible. They commission only the most conservative artists, creating a reactionary movement that becomes even more rigid than pre-Leonardo Renaissance art. Meanwhile, a small group of artists, inspired by Leonardo's experiments, pushes toward increasingly radical abstraction without the centuries of technical development that originally supported such innovations. The result is an artistic culture war that bleeds into religious and political conflicts. The Catholic Church, already dealing with the early stirrings of Protestant reform, becomes even more suspicious of artistic innovation. The sophisticated use of art for Counter-Reformation propaganda never develops because artistic expression has become too controversial and unpredictable. Protestant regions, meanwhile, might embrace the new abstract approaches as a way of rejecting Catholic artistic traditions, but they lack the technical foundation to make these approaches truly successful. By 1600, European art exists in a state of creative chaos. Some regions cling to increasingly primitive representational styles, while others produce abstract works that won't be properly understood or contextualized for centuries. The careful balance between innovation and tradition that characterized the High Renaissance never develops. Instead of the smooth artistic evolution that led from Renaissance masters to Baroque grandeur to Romantic expression and eventually to modern movements, you've created an artistic timeline where centuries of development get compressed into decades of confusion. But here's the most profound consequence you never considered. Modern art wasn't just about aesthetic innovation. It was deeply connected to industrialization, urbanization, mass media, and psychological understanding that didn't exist in Leonardo's time. Pollock's action paintings reflected post-World War trauma and existential anxiety. Warhol's pop art commented on consumer culture and mass production. Duchamp's conceptual work challenged assumptions about originality in an age of mechanical reproduction. By introducing these artistic concepts without their cultural context, you've essentially given Leonardo and his contemporaries a language to express experiences they haven't had and ideas they can't fully understand. It's like teaching someone to write poetry in a language they don't speak about emotions they've never felt. The art that results might be technically interesting, but it lacks the cultural resonance that gave modern art its power and meaning. The ultimate moral question becomes clear. In your attempt to accelerate artistic development, have you actually stunted it? By disrupting the natural evolution of artistic expression, you've potentially prevented both the Renaissance masters from achieving their full potential within their own context and the eventual modern artists from developing their revolutionary approaches organically. You've created a timeline where art exists in a state of premature sophistication without the cultural maturity to support it. This scenario reveals something profound about the nature of creativity and cultural evolution. Artistic movements don't exist in isolation. They emerge from specific historical, technological, and philosophical contexts. Remove those contexts, and even the most revolutionary artistic concepts become hollow gestures. Leonardo showing up in 1960s New York would be just as disoriented as Pollock materializing in Renaissance Florence. The deeper question is whether artistic progress is actually linear. Your time travel experiment suggests that there might not be a single trajectory from primitive to sophisticated art. Instead, Each period might represent a unique solution to the artistic challenges of its time. Renaissance art perfectly captured the optimism and human-centered worldview of its era. Modern art reflected the fragmentation and uncertainty of the industrial age. Neither is inherently superior to the other. So what's the answer to our original question? Showing Leonardo da Vinci modern art wouldn't just change his work or accelerate artistic development. It would create a fundamental disruption in the cultural evolution that made both Renaissance and modern art meaningful. You'd end up with a timeline where centuries of artistic achievement get replaced by confused experimentation that satisfies neither traditional nor modern sensibilities. Perhaps the most unsettling realization is that true artistic revolution can't be rushed or imposed from the outside. It has to emerge organically from the cultural conditions that make it necessary and meaningful. Your well-intentioned intervention might actually prove that some changes can only happen in their proper time, and that trying to shortcut cultural evolution leads not to advancement but to chaos. What do you think would actually happen if Leonardo saw a Pollock painting? Would his scientific mind embrace the chaos, or would his classical training make him reject it entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more mind-bending time travel scenarios that will change how you think about history, art, and the delicate threads that connect past and future.